everybody, welcome back to the Kimberbell Clear Blue Tiles Seasonal Houses Table Runner Quilt Along. We're on week 2. This week we're going to work on our house blocks and our tree blocks. We went over fabric prep in week 1. I've picked a neutral thread color I'm going to use throughout this project. And I'll be using a 5x7 hoop today and show you how to do the house block and the tree block. Instructions for this project are included on the USB in your Clear Blue Tiles Essential Set. We're going to start with the house blocks. Looking slightly ahead on page 4, they've got a great picture here for the template for the house block. I'm going to lay out all my fabrics in order for one house block to make it easier when I'm sitting at my embroidery machine. Here's a layout for one of my house blocks. I've got house pieces 2, 1, 3, 4, and 7, and my background pieces 5 and 6, and 8 and 9. Let's go over to the machine and stitch out a house. We're at the machine. I've got my light mesh cutaway loaded into a 5x7 hoop. Hand tighten, screwdriver tighten. It does say to use the ultra light mesh. I don't have the ultra light. This will be just fine. Let's load our file. I'm on a Baby Lock Meridian today. I was going to do this on my Baby Lock Pathfinder, which is the smaller machine, but it's in the shop for repairs. The USB is not working and I need the USB for this project. I'm going to go ahead and bring that up. USB. This is the Clear Blue Tiles USB that comes with your Essential Set. I do have some other things on there that I've added to the drive, so you won't have all of these. You want to look for the Seasonal Houses Table Runner folder. We need the embroidery files. My machine uses the file PES, and we're going to start with the house. We don't need to add anything additional to this because right now we're just going to be piecing the block. So I'm going to hit Set and embroidery, and we're ready to go. The first thing we're going to do is stitch the pieced house template right onto your stabilizer. It says to use a visible thread. This is white. My thread is off-white. I know I can see it. You can always use a different color thread for this step if it's easier for you to see a different color thread on top of this background, and then switch when you're ready to start piecing. Here we go. I've got that all stitched out. I can see that just fine. Look at your diagram here. We're going to start with piece 1. It happens to be your door fabric. Here's my door fabric. We need to place this covering, section 1, right side up. If you have a fabric like mine, it has some prints on it. I can think about if I want to get the little colors in the middle. I'm going to go ahead and try and do that. Why not? Give it some character. You can tape this if you like. Got my Kimberbell paper tape here. When I reference taping things, that's what I'm talking about. I'll go ahead and put a piece right there. We're going to stitch a trimming and placement line. Once that line is stitched, go ahead and remove tape if you used it. And then you're going to trim away the fabric that is on this side of the line. The rest is going to stay and will be your door. Once you have that trimmed, you want piece 2 of your fabric, and I need to pay attention how I place these because I have directional fabric. I'm going to go with the white stripes up near the top. Place it right sides together like this. Center the side of this piece of fabric along that trimming and placement line. I'm going to put that down, use a little piece of tape, and then it's going to stitch a seam. Once that seam is stitched, I need to pull this a little closer. You may need to remove it from your machine, especially if you're ironing it. We're going to flip this, and you have a couple of choices. You can finger press, which I think is fine. I have this little clover seam roller. It's plastic. You just sort of do this, and it helps press that seam down a little bit better than finger pressing. You can also take this to your ironing board and iron the seam if you like. Don't iron on the bed of your machine and melt your machine. And put the piece of tape there just to keep that out of the way. We're going to stitch another trimming and placement line on the other side of the door. Just like before, trim this excess fabric off. Didn't quite get my little square centered, but it looks pretty good. Actually, we're going to stitch a seam. They're going to be very close to center. Once you have that trimmed, grab your piece 3 fabric, place it down so your right sides are together, again centering along that line, and it's going to stitch the seam right there I'm going to put a little piece of tape there. Go ahead and remove your tape if you used it. Flip it just like the other one. Finger press it, roll it with a roller, take it to the ironing board. Whatever you prefer, go ahead and press that seam. And I'm going to tape this down just to get it out of the way. My door came out pretty good. We're going to stitch another trimming and placement line. Trim your excess fabric. Once you've got that trimmed, grab your piece 4 fabric, center it along that line, place it right sides together, and if anything is bubbling up like that, you can always tape it. That's because I'm using the little seam roller. I'm not pressing it on the ironing board. You can always press on the ironing board. I just don't want to get up and down 20 times. Now we're going to stitch the seam. If you used any tape like I did, go ahead and remove your tape. Same process. Flip it up. Give it a good press. The next trimming and placement line is going to go here. Do you see how this isn't quite pressed really well? I want to give it an extra roll, and I'm going to sort of pull it to make sure it's lying flat, and I'm going to add a piece of tape just to help that lay flat while it stitches out that trimming and placement line. Remove any tape. Go ahead and trim this fabric right here. Once that's trimmed, you need your piece 5 background fabric. If it's got a print, make sure you've got it the correct orientation. Mine's a solid. Technically right sides together, it's not going to matter for mine, but again, if you've got a print fabric, make sure you're putting right sides together. Wrong side is up right now, and we're going to stitch the seam. You want to press that seam. I'm going to go ahead and roll that out, and then we're going to stitch another trimming and placement line over on this side. This one looks like it's lying nice and flat. I'll still add another little piece of tape down here just in case. Remove any tape. Trim off this extra fabric. Once you've got that trimmed, you need your piece 6 background fabric. Again, right sides together if you've got a print in your background. Center it along that trimming and placement line, and then stitch the seam. Go ahead and flip that out. Give it a good press, however you're doing your pressing, rolling, finger press at the iron. That looks good. Then we're going to stitch another trimming and placement line. It's going to go across the top here. Make sure everything's nice and flat. I may add a piece of tape here on this just to hold it in place. This one I'm not worried about because it's going to go this way, but I'm going to add a little piece right there just to make sure it's nice and tight and flat. Remove tape if you used any. Trim the extra fabric from across the top, and then get your roof fabric. I've got my roof fabric. You want to center it along this top line we just stitched. Right sides together again. So right side down, wrong side up, centered along that line. Just like that, and then we'll stitch the seam. Once that's stitched out, same process, flip it up, give it a good press. Once I press this with the little seam roller, I'm actually going to tape it across the top just in case to make sure it's nice and flat, and we're going to be stitching a couple of diagonal lines next. Go ahead and get rid of the fabric on this side of the trimming and placement line. I've got that trimmed. I tried to get as close as possible to that trimming line as I could because I have a white fabric and a dark roof. If you've got something even darker and a lighter colored background, you could put Fusible on the back of this. I'm going to center this right side down and stitch the seam. Once that seam is stitched, you're going to flip it and press it, just like we've been doing. So flip it and press it. I'm going to add a little piece of tape just in case. We are going to do the last piece, and then it's going to stitch all the way around and give us a trimming guide. So I want to make sure that this one stays nice and flat. Now I've got that ready. I'm going to stitch the next trimming and placement line. Go ahead and trim your excess fabric on this side of that line. All the fabric's trimmed. Take your last piece. This is background piece number 9. Right side down, wrong side up, center it along that line. We're going to stitch the seam. Once this is stitched, same thing, flip it and press it, and then we're going to stitch the cut line. I'm going to take an extra minute and pull this off my machine and make sure everything is rolled. I'm still not going to take it to the ironing board, but what I am going to do is when I see something like that, let me move this up so you can see. If I've got something like this with a bump, I want to give it an extra press, and then I'll tape it so it's nice and flat. It's going to stitch a square all the way around your block. We're all stitched out. We have to make 4 more of these. You need 5 houses total. You can do them one at a time in a 5x7 hoop, or if you have a bigger hoop, you can do multiples. We're at the table. You want to go ahead and remove your project from the hoop. I hand tightened and screwdriver tightened. Once it's out of the hoop, we want to trim right on that cut line. This is the trim exactly on the cut line. Your block ends up being 4.5 inches square. I happen to have a 4.5 inch ruler, and I believe I have a square 4.5 inch orange pop ruler. Let's go look. I do. I have the square and the rectangle set of the orange pop rulers. If you're new to these are made by Kimberbell, and when you use them, you trim on the inside. So there's several ways actually to trim this. If you happen to have a 4.5 inch square ruler, you can put it down, trim all the way around. You can use a straight ruler, line it up, trim all 4 sides. If you have the orange pop ruler, you can use that. I'm going to show this in case you've never seen this before. I like to use a rotating cutting mat with the orange pop rulers. This is an OmniGrid 14WGR is what it's called. I'll link it below. I'll give some information on rotating cutting mats. How you use these if you've never seen them before is you line them up along that line. This is the 4.5 inch size. The square set comes with 4.5, 6.5, and 8.5. Since this is the smallest size, I'm actually going to place the next ruler on top of it. It gives me a little more room to hold that down. Once you have it centered, you cut on this side and you put your blade in the little notch, and you want to make sure you move it as far over as you can, because there's a notch. You don't want it loose on this side. You want to bump against the inside of this ruler. You'll cut like that. And then I'm going to turn and cut the other 3 sides. Make sure the blade's in the notch all the way over, touching the ruler. Don't cut your finger. I felt a little bump there. I need to change the blade on my rotary cutter. I'm going to set this aside. I'll make the remaining houses, but let's move on and make a tree block together. Here's how I laid out my trees. This is an 18-inch design board. I wanted to lay them all out together. You can do them one by one. All of these pieces are the same size. All of the trunks are the same size. And all of the tree background pieces, 2, 3, 5, 6, 8, 9, 11, and 12, they're all the same size. They're all 2 by 3. I'll be using a 5x7 hoop for this one as well. Let's bring up our file. Same thing, it's going to be on the USB. We need the Seasonal Houses table runner, and we need our embroidery files, and this time we need the tree. That's all we need. I'm going to go ahead and hit set and embroidery. This block is very similar to the house block, except we've got lines kind of going up and down, side to side, a little bit all over the place. So I'm going to step through this one with you. Let's start with our template. We have the template stitched out. I'm looking at it and looking at these super tiny triangles. I'm pretty good with traditional piecing for quilts, but wow, those are small. And so is this trunk. That's where we're going to start. This will be probably a lot easier building on your embroidery machine than having to do this traditionally. Grab your trunk fabric. I'm going to place it covering that trunk part of the template, right side up for your first piece of fabric. Go ahead and trim off this fabric on this side of the line, on the left side. Once you have that trimmed, you need your background fabric. Right side down, wrong side up if you're working with a print. Center it along that line. We're going to stitch the seam. If you've got a dark fabric here and a thin fabric or a light colored fabric here, you could put fusible on the back of these. Once that's stitched, go ahead, flip that open, press that seam, and then we're going to stitch the next trimming and placement line on the other side of the trunk. Go ahead and trim away this fabric. Grab another background piece, right side down, wrong side up, center it along that line, and then we're going to stitch the seam. Roll that over to the side, press that, and then the next trimming and placement line is going to be across the top. So if you're pressing either a finger press or using a roller like me, if you want, make sure they're nice and flat and add a piece of tape to each side. I've pressed it, I've added my tape. My tape is outside of all of the lines of the template. So as I'm going and I'm taping these pieces on the outside, I don't have to worry about peeling the tape off before the next step because it won't get caught. It's all going to get trimmed off at the end. Let's stitch the next trimming and placement line. Trim off this fabric above that line that you just stitched, and then we're going to be grabbing a piece of the tree fabric. I've trimmed the extra fabric. I'm working with something directional. I'm looking at the little shape here. I've got the peach on top. I want to make sure that it's going to be the same peach on top. Right sides together, wrong side up, centered along that stitching line. Flip that piece up, press that seam, and then we're going to stitch the next trimming and placement line. Once you've stitched that line, remove tape if you used any, and we're going to cut off this fabric on this side of that stitch line. You need a piece of your background fabric, right side down, centered along that line, and then we'll stitch the seam. Flip that up, give it a good press. I'm going to add a small piece of tape to that since I'm not pressing with my iron. It does look nice and flat, but just in case, that'll make sure it stays nice and flat. The next line we're going to stitch goes this way. I'll need to take my tape off of this side, and now we're going to trim this fabric here. Grab a piece of your background fabric, right side down, wrong side up, centered along that line, and stitch the seam. Flip that, give it a good press. I'm going to add a piece of tape over here again. The next line we're going to stitch is going to go across the top. Trim off this extra fabric. It does overlap here from these stitch lines. I can't trim this part because it's got all the tack down lines underneath, but remember this is going to be the next piece of our tree. It should be covered by the darker fabric. If when you're trimming you accidentally cut through your stabilizer, grab a piece of paper tape and put it on the back, and then you can keep going. Get your next piece of tree fabric, center it along that line, right side down, wrong side up. Go ahead and stitch the seam. Flip this up, give it a good press, add a piece of tape up here if you like, and then we're going to stitch the next trimming and placement line. You can see right here is where that bulk was, and it's covered up by this fabric, no problem. Once that line is stitched, go ahead, trim off the extra fabric, grab a background piece, right side down, center it along that line, and stitch the seam. Just like before, flip it, press it, tape it if needed, and then we're going to stitch the next trimming and placement line. Trim off the extra fabric, grab another background fabric, right side down, centered along that placement line, and stitch your seam. Flip that, press it, tape it if needed, and then we're going to stitch the next trimming and placement line with the last piece of tree fabric. Remove any tape, and then trim the extra fabric right here. We're on our last piece of tree fabric, and again, don't worry if you've got a little bit of extra fabric up here at the point, it's going to be covered. Right side down, centered along that line, and then we're going to stitch the seam. Flip that up, give it a good press, tape it right up top if you like. I'm going to go ahead and do that since I'm just using the seam roller. And then we're going to stitch another trimming and placement line. We have 2 more pieces of the background fabric to place before we stitch the final outline. Trim off this fabric, grab a piece of your background fabric, right side down, centered along that stitching line, and then stitch the seam. Flip that up, give it a press. I'm going to add a piece of tape to the top of that. And then we're going to stitch another trimming and placement line. It's going to go over here. Trim off the extra fabric on this side. Grab your background fabric, right side down, wrong side up, centered along that placement line. Then we're going to stitch the seam. Flip that up, give it a press, tape it if needed. Then we're going to stitch the trimming line, which is going to stitch all the way around our tree. If anything is sticking up, you can tape it down at this point. Go ahead and get your project out of the hoop. This I'm going to trim using a regular ruler. It's 2.5 inches wide. This happens to be a 2.5 inch wide ruler. Looks like I cut it a little bit wonky. This will be caught in the seam allowance. I'm going to make the rest of my houses, the rest of my trees, and then I'm going to give them a good press with the iron. Here are all my houses and all my trees. I did everything one at a time in a 5x7 hoop. It took me about 2 hours and 15 minutes to do the last 4 houses. And the last 3 trees. I did have to stop a couple times for doggy breaks. For next week, if you haven't already cut your background fabrics, the border corners, and got your binding ready, make sure you do that. We'll be finishing our project next week. We're going to assemble the runner, and we're going to quilt it using the clear blue tiles. I have the Essentials set and the Expansion set. This is the first Expansion set. These have bigger tiles in them. I think now they have Expansion set number 2. This is just Expansion set number 1. It gave me some larger options. Before next week, get out your user's guide. Look at page 6 and 7, and then also 8 and 9. I have some sticky notes here already that I did with my Pathfinder when I first purchased the clear blue tiles. This is going to help you when you have to decide which size tile you want to use. They have an example chart up here for a 6x10 hoop, and they show the tile file size and the embroidery field size. The tile file size is a bit different than the embroidery field size. They give you a blank chart on page 8. I put sticky notes on this when I bought it. There's also a great chart on page 9. And on page 10, it shows you the files that you got with your Essentials set. Kimberbell also has a great blog on the sizing for the tiles. I'm going to link that below in the description box. You can have a look at that. Thank you for joining me for the Kimberbell Clear Blue Tiles Seasonal Houses Table Runner project. We just finished week 2. You want to work on your house blocks and your tree blocks, and then next week we're going to put everything together, build our runner, and quilt it with clear blue tiles. Any comments or questions are welcome. Please leave them below for me. Thanks for watching. See you next time.